Back in 2019, I declared the Lincoln Aviator the best Lincoln they had ever built. Well, it's a good thing I'm not a betting man because it hasn't exactly set the sales charts on fire, even though I still think the Aviator is absolutely excellent, especially in the plug-in hybrid trim we're taking a look at today. Even though 2024 is expected to bring a pretty decent refresh to the inside and perhaps some exterior tweaks as well, I think there's still some solid reasons to look at the 2023 model year Aviator over the XT5, the MDX, the XC90, and a wide variety of the direct competition. I've always liked the look of the Aviator, and I think it's continued to age well over the last 4 years on sale. We have full LED headlights up here, really slim turn signals. The grille is a little bit frowny shaped, but I think it's a lot less controversial than what we've seen from Lexus lately. These individual little elements mimic the Lincoln logo, if you're wondering what that geometric pattern is going on right there. Then, of course, we have the Lincoln turbine wheels. I'm definitely a fan of a turbine wheel. I also appreciate the long hood profile and the clean horizontal lines. Versus the two best sellers in the mid-size three-row luxury segment, that would be the Acura MDX and the Volvo XC90, the Aviator sports a rear-wheel drive drivetrain design, which is why we find the long hood profile here and we find the front wheel pushed so far to the front. It really gives this an elegant presence, and again, it accentuates the horizontal lines we find here. Now, if you look more closely, you will notice that the roofline does drop towards the rear, and that's why even though this looks on the boxy side of things, we have a little bit less third-row headroom than you'll find in some options. But the size of this and the presence of it, I think, are very attractive, but it's a lot easier to park than the Lincoln Navigator. Be sure and sound off. Let me know what you think of the styling of the Aviator in the comments section. It is definitely very horizontal back here in the rear as well, and I have heard some folks say that they're seeing a bit too much forward edge in this design. To me, I'm actually seeing a little bit more of some of the luxury competition with the full LED stripes here. We have full LED turn signals, those are amber, but we do get these chromed areas. So they're chrome during the day when the lights are not on, and then of course they illuminate when those lights are active. One solid reason to buy this over something like the XC90 or the MDX is if you plan on towing regularly. We do have a 2-inch receiver right there, and even though the tow rating on the Aviator isn't class topping, it's not where we find some of the competition over 7,000 pounds, etc., the way that the Aviator tows is absolutely excellent because the drivetrain design under the hood is more like a BMW X5, X7, or of course a Ford F-150 because it uses the same 10-speed automatic transmission we find in Ford's truck lineup and a variant of the same engine family. So drivetrain design-wise, this is definitely going to be an excellent towing vehicle, even though the tongue weight rating and the total tow weight rating are a little bit lower. How much lower? Well, the plug-in hybrid is capable of towing 5,600 pounds. The gasoline version bumps that up to 6,700 pounds. Now, the plug-in hybrid version isn't just about fuel sipping, it's also the highest performing version of the Aviator, which is why we find the quad exhaust tips down here. Also, the EV range isn't the longest in the biz. To be honest, I've never understood why the Cadillac XT6 sells better than the Lincoln Aviator. The Aviator is about the same price or a little bit less expensive depending on how you configure it. We get about 100 horsepower more standard and an interior that I think is better put together than in the Cadillac. And then of course there is this model, the plug-in hybrid system available. This is based around a 3-liter twin-turbo V6. But combined with the electric motor, it produces 494 horsepower, 630 pound-feet of torque. This is the swiftest version of the Aviator and also the most efficient. There is a 13.6 kilowatt-hour lithium-ion battery pack on board, positioned under the body. It doesn't really take up any interior space, but it's not going to give you the kind of range you might be expecting in a modern plug-in hybrid. Remember, the battery is pretty small. Unlike the recently refreshed XC90 plug-in hybrid, which will get you a little under 40 miles of all-electric range, or the upcoming X5 refresh, which might give us over 40 miles of range, this comes in at 21 miles of range and 23 miles per gallon afterwards. That will probably disappoint some folks. On the other hand, nearly 500 horsepower and 23 miles per gallon is still a pretty good number, even if we're not talking about the plug-in hybrid range. And if you do have the ability to plug it in at home, plug it in at work, plug it in wherever, you could really drastically cut your gasoline consumption. Even on my daily commute, I would be cutting my gasoline consumption at least in half by driving this over the regular version. Then of course, I still get nearly 500 horsepower. But your numbers will obviously vary. All the fueling happens on the driver's side. Over here we have the J1772 charge port. While we're here, we should talk about something unrelated to filling. You'll notice this interesting little square door here just in front of the side view mirror. That's where you can put the key and then unlock the driver's door. That's needed because Lincoln wanted to give us a very clean exterior design, so we have handles that don't move. They're electronic release handles with a button on the inside, then you pull them open. They didn't want that lock mechanism there, so they put it way up front. In case you're wondering, we still get the number pad illuminated on the driver's door, but when it's off, it really just blends in with the black pillar. And lastly, the gasoline, that goes in right back here. Although right now I am in the very top-end version of the Aviator, I find the front seats to be very comfortable in every version. The controls are over here on the driver's seat, and there's a lot of adjustability. Definitely more adjustability and more comfort than you'll find in the XT6. We of course have a powered tilt telescopic memory-linked steering column, but one thing that continues to be unusual about the Lincoln seats is that you can adjust the length of the seat bottom cushion different for your left and right leg. I suppose that's really handy if you have a peg leg or you have one leg that's shorter than the other. That definitely happens, but for me, my legs are the same length, so I have always thought that was a little odd. Jumping into the middle row, I have plenty of room back here. We have the panoramic moonroof in this model. I still have about 2 inches of headroom left. Pretty decent recline to these second row seats, although there are a few that will recline more. These are manual seats, so they slide forward and backward with a bar right under there. And this model has captain's chairs with a fixed center console in the middle. The center console features some buttons so I can open and close this shade here. Also, a storage area and cup holders that we'll take a look at in a bit. Although you will find a larger screen in the back of a Grand Wagoneer, you won't find a screen at all in the Volvo, the Acura, the Lexus, etc. This has controls for the rear heated and ventilated seats, climate control zones, air quality, audio, vehicle settings there, etc. We have some small air vents below that, charge ports down below that. 2 big cup holders here, some real wood trim on this console, controls for that upper shade, and then back here we have a roller cover for a fairly deep storage area. Separate armrests for the 2 outboard seating positions right there. Integrated manual sunshades and the same level of quality on the rear doors that we find on the front. Lots and lots of stitched material is going on for these doors and soft touch materials down there at the bottom. Let me know what you think about the color scheme in this model. This is the black label package for the Aviator. It includes some exclusive colors on the inside and definitely a lot of upgraded materials. Now, it doesn't, of course, bring us any extra third row room, but it is still pretty decent as far as the luxury category goes. Remember, the Acura MDX is the best-selling entry in this segment, and the MDX's third row isn't exactly enormous. Although the numbers would indicate that headroom back here is decently below some of the competition, if I'm sitting in a very natural seating position right like this, I have about 1.5 inches of headroom left. That's because where they're measuring headroom is right next to this, I guess, structural element back here behind the main portion of the roof. It's just above the headrest. So if I wanted to put my head on the head restraint itself, then my head is touching the ceiling. But for most folks, it's going to be fairly comfortable. What's going to be a little bit less comfortable is that the seat bottom cushion is, of course, pretty low to the ground. If you want a more comfortable third row, you're going to find that in the Navigator, the Grand Wagoneer, etc., that next size category up. But those are going to be a lot bigger than this. Now, as far as the legroom goes, if I move this seat all the way back, put that back in place, you'll definitely notice there's really not a lot of legroom going on here. However, I could put the second row seat further forward, put this seat so that I would still have about 3 or 4 inches of legroom as a 6 foot tall person, and then I could squeak in maybe 2 inches of legroom back here in the third row. Although most owners are likely to keep the third row folded most of the time, we do get air vents and cup holders back here for the third row, but as you'd expect, we also have plenty of hard plastics back there. Behind the power hatch, we find 18.3 cubic feet of cargo capacity, the same that we find in the non-plug-in hybrid model. The hatch is a little on the low side. I've actually been noticing that a lot of hatches lately seem a little low for me at just 6 feet tall, so if you're taller than me, know that you're probably going to be banging on that all the time. The cargo area is definitely generous for a luxury segment 3-row vehicle, even though this is a rear-wheel drive biased vehicle. You can almost fit a 22-inch roller bag in this position, but let's be honest, they really are probably going to need to be in that position to close the hatch. There is a reasonable amount of storage space back here, even though we have a powered third-row seat, which normally occupies a lot of storage area. I know this is controversial, but I really love the fact that Lincoln has color matched every single piece of plastic in this interior. The rear shoulder belts, the shoulder belts themselves, the cargo area, etc. Except for this black handle right there for that cargo area, and of course the carpet inside. But there's still extra storage here, again, even though we have a plug-in hybrid. So this is the area where you could definitely put larger bags. And under that floor, we have something you absolutely won't find in competitive luxury plug-in hybrids. We have a temporary spare. As we look around the interior, keep in mind this is the top-end Black Label edition, so we have unique interior colors, and again, lots of color-matched plastics. So this center overhead console area, the microphone for the active noise cancellation system, even the HomeLink transmitter buttons are all the same sort of plum color we find in the rest of the interior. But there are still a few black plastics. I guess it makes sense that this plastic over here is a charcoal section. We also have the suede headliner and this very large panoramic moonroof. It's absolutely huge. It goes to just about the second row passengers' heads. We have sunshades over there for the second row, height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, and these very eccentrically shaped front seats. Let's dive a little deeper. The headrests are four-way adjustable. You can see that they actually telescope out of this section. Over here we have a hard plastic on this side, softer touch, slush molded plastics over on that side, and that accounts for the entire back of the seat. We then have that little chrome accent, and then you can see that the shoulder section of the seat actually can be telescoped out of that seat section itself, so you can adjust the curvature of that seat back. We then have front seat massage and the very distinctive Lincoln feature with the extending thigh cushions that can be adjusted independently. The front seat controls are on the front doors. We have that metal speaker grill over there, lots of soft touch materials over here. This section is actually a stitched material for this midsection, but the upper portion of the door, this is an injection molded and then after stitched piece. So we don't find the real leather upholstery that you find on some of the competitions on those upper door sections. There are a few areas here where some of the luxury competition definitely exceeds the build quality in here, but Lincoln has done a really good job. Again, lots of color matching going on, and unlike many options, even the lower portion of the door is made from a soft touch material. But let's go back to this passenger seat. As you can see, you can extend one of those without the other. You can swap them back and forth like that as well. I suppose that could be handy if you wanted to sit like this, where you had one leg up like that, and then you want a little bit of extra support for the accelerator pedal, but I still have never had a problem with a seat that just had one thigh extension. But let's get back to the dashboard. We have a real wood trim strip that runs right across the dashboard, Lincoln logo in there. It's a little bit hard to see in this lighting, but we then have a injection molded upper section of the dashboard, stitched midsection of the dashboard, lots of piano black trim going on here in the midsection of the dash, air vents right there. And then down here we have soft touch plastics, just as you'd expect in a luxury vehicle. Again, more color match stuff. Large bin-style glove compartment back there, and then you'll really notice how much this dashboard juts out from that area. So you can see that the glove box is right under there. We then have this big shelf-like dash section in that area. Moving over to the center console area, we definitely find a smaller screen than we find in some luxury options. That real wood trim strip runs right behind the screen, and it is continuous behind there. This is the biggest change that we expect to see for 2024. All indications point to a much bigger screen happening in here, but I think the screen is actually perfectly serviceable. It's just not quite as exciting as some. If we go back to the home menu, we can see we do have the basic Lincoln software here that we see in a number of other vehicles. It's based on Ford's Sync software, so it's pretty snappy in this latest version. Engine start stop button right over there. Moving down from there, we find some controls for the 360-degree camera system. This takes us over to the driver assistance settings, and this is the automated parking assist button. We have large air vents there, the toggle shifters for the transmission. I guess you could also call those piano keys. I think that's what Lincoln calls that shifter design right there. There's also a storage area under this section of the dash. More real wood trim right here with some buttons for the climate control system and the audio system there. Moving down from there, we find lots more black plastic. I do wish this was real wood rather than this black plastic trim. You can see this is already a little bit scratched up here. Two large cup holders there, a large storage area. You can keep your smartphone, things like that. We do have USB input ports in that area as well. Electronic parking brake there. The drive mode selector over here, it is a knob. As you rotate it around, you'll see those various different drive modes on the full LCD instrument cluster. Between the front seats, we find a large padded center armrest. It's definitely wider than some of the competition. This is a wider cabin than you'll find, say, in an MDX or an XC90, and you'll really notice that by the width of this center console area. So if you're looking for something a bit wider and a bit more comfortable, you might want to take a look at this. On the driver's side, we have a full color heads-up display, and then again, we have that large full LCD instrument cluster. But unlike some of the competition, this LCD is not terribly configurable. Instead, Lincoln has opted for a very simplistic look for a lot of the displays in here. Moving out from there, we find this round 3-spoke steering wheel. These are the controls for the audio system, so track forward, backward, volume, up, down. If I push this button to activate the cruise control, then the cruise control controls illuminate here. These are actually sort of piano key-like buttons. They're on the back of the steering wheel right there, so it's not a touch button on the front. They're actually toggles, real physical buttons on the back. Leather-wrapped airbag cover, and some additional controls over here. This relates to that multifunction LCD up there, but as you can see, it does change based on exactly what's going on with the vehicle. So for instance, if I click the settings option, you'll notice we have a menu up there. This then becomes a toggle to move around. We then click over there for OK, over there for back, and then the home button takes you back to that button arrangement. On the back of the steering wheel, we find fairly small shift paddles, and on this side, we find the voice command button. I do think that's an awkward place to put it because I end up hitting it randomly as I'm trying to park. Let's start out the drive in pure EV mode. You can be fairly aggressive with the throttle and even climb mountains and get up to highway speed in pure EV mode. This is still going to be an all-wheel drive vehicle in EV mode as well, unlike, say, a Volvo XC90, which is going to be only rear-wheel drive in EV mode. That's because this still has that mechanical all-wheel drive system, and the power to the wheels is still going through the 10-speed automatic transmission. So if you're worried about all-weather capability, really a solid feel when it comes to all-weather capability, you're going to want to take a look at a system like this over anything with an all-wheel drive axle in the back, even a decently done one like the one in the Volvo. Now, because I am digging deeper in the throttle right now, there's a little message over here on the instrument cluster that's saying I can hold down a button to allow engine operation. I don't have to do that though, because this is not one of those vehicles that limits you only to EV operation for every throttle application. If I floor it, it's going to turn on the gasoline engine whether I press that button or not, because it assumes you want nearly 500 horsepower. Bearing in mind the Aviator is pretty heavy, you really do want it to turn on the engine when you floor it. And when it is floored, you will go 0 to 60 in 5 seconds even. That was ever so slightly faster than the last Aviator plug-in hybrid we tested. But there are a few plug-ins that are going to be a little bit peppier, mainly due to the curb weight that we find in this versus some of those competitors. Stopping distance, however, is still pretty decent, 125 feet from 60 miles an hour back to 0. As is the handling performance. This handles exceptionally well. It has the solid rear-wheel drive dynamics you'd expect, and even though the suspension is definitely tuned towards the softer side of things, if you push it harder, things hunker down and it really grabs the road nicely. This is certainly going to drive more like the X5 and the X7 than the Volvo XC90 because, design-wise, it's really more like the BMW and the Mercedes. Now, when it comes to the absolute handling score, I'm going to have to give this an A- because the suspension is certainly tuned towards the softer side of things. You notice that it sort of gently wafts over some of these road imperfections. It doesn't feel floaty-boaty. Even if I waggle the steering wheel, it stays very level. It doesn't really have much body roll at all. And that's because of the adaptive suspension system that we find on board. It really keeps those kind of motions under control, but because the tuning was designed to make this very comfortable for long highway journeys, it does have that slow rolling feel. Out on a rougher road surface like the gravel road that we're on here, the air suspension really has a lovely feel to it. It soaks up all of these large imperfections and small imperfections very well. The potholes, the ruts in this road, the little speed bumps, etc. You don't really feel much at all as you're cruising down the road. As far as ride quality goes, this is definitely more refined than what we see in the current generation Jeep Grand Cherokee, even though that also has an adaptive air suspension. That's because that vehicle is just a little bit differently focused than the Lincoln, and this is really trying to be the cushiest thing going in this segment. And I really appreciate that because this is certainly more comfortable than the Cadillac XT6, also more comfortable than the adaptive suspension system that's available in the Acura MDX. In my opinion, there are too many luxury car companies that are overly focused on performance and really having a firm suspension tune. I think it's refreshing that there is one luxury company out there that is still focused on being comfortable, but without being a modern-day marshmallow. Back out on the paved road, I measured 69.5 decibels at 50 miles an hour, putting this right in the thick of things for the luxury segment. It's not quite as quiet as an X7 or an X5. Those are exceptionally quiet in this generation, but it is still very solid when compared against the Acura, the Lexus, etc. Fuel economy, well, let's just say that's never been this drivetrain's mission or really its forte. I've been averaging 23.5 miles per gallon over a week driving this as just a hybrid. Then when we were charging it up, we averaged about 18 miles on a charge. So definitely a little bit less on the range side than what Lincoln was estimating. And the guessometer by the end of the week was actually just usually averaging an estimate of about 14 miles when fully charged, but we were able to get a little bit further. If you were driving this on level city traffic, keeping the speeds really a little bit lower than we have been here, etc., you could probably get 20 to 22 miles of range out of the battery, but you're going to have to be fairly gentle with the throttle. Now, speaking of the plug-in hybrid system, Lincoln has definitely refined this setup since I last drove it. The throttle is still a little bit touchy in electric drive mode. That's probably my only complaint left, but transitions between gasoline and hybrid mode, and certainly the regenerative braking feel, have been significantly improved over the last time that I drove this. You'll really notice that in stop and go and slow and go traffic. When I first drove the 2020 Aviator plug-in hybrid, it was definitely a little herky-jerky. Those transitions were not smooth at all, and sometimes they were accompanied by some quite harsh shifts. I did not have that experience at all driving this model. When it comes to the regen braking, this is not going to be as smooth as, say, a Lexus RX, because the mechanical energy, of course, is going through that 10-speed automatic transmission on its way to the electric motor, where it's then converted into electricity. And we don't see that in a classic Lexus hybrid system. On the other hand, of course, the new Hybrid Max system that we find in the Lexus RX feels substantially similar to this because it operates in a very similar fashion. Although clearly not everybody's cup of tea, I happen to like the combination of things going on in this Lincoln. The soft and supple ride is definitely an asset. The acceleration is also excellent, as is the braking score. The handling ability is very solid. Not everybody is going to be thrilled with the soft suspension tune, but handling is definitely excellent. Now let's get to the nitty-gritty. Clearly, Lincoln lacks the brand equity of the full-on luxury marquees like BMW, Mercedes, Lexus, etc. But to be honest, I would buy this over the Lexus RX. I would also buy it over the Acura MDX, the Infiniti QX60, etc., etc., and even the brand new Mazda CX-90, which I think is very well done. I might buy the Lincoln over that Mazda, even though this is going to cost an awful lot more. But there is something to keep in mind with that awful lot more price. I know that the price tag of this disturbs some shoppers. $89,925 as equipped. The plug-in hybrid started at $70,190, and an absolute base Aviator starts at $53,340. But let's pick that apart a bit more. The base Aviator is actually a little bit less expensive than most of the versions of Cadillac XT6 you'll see out there, and you get 100 more horsepower, you get a rear-wheel drive biased vehicle, a much nicer interior, and a vehicle that is quite simply way more fun to drive. Also, I think a bit more practical. Also, versus something like an MDX Type S, I would just buy a base Lincoln Aviator. This is simply a better vehicle. It's better dynamically as well. Now, versus some of the other more, mainstream luxury options, I would say, more the classic luxury brands like BMW or Mercedes, then yes, I could see reasons that this interior is not as refined, the electronics are not as advanced, etc., as we find in those models, but they will cost you an awful lot more. Remember, we live in a world where a Jeep Grand Cherokee 3-row with a V6 that's naturally aspirated and more than 100 less horsepower really than you find in the base version of this will cost you nearly $80,000 in its top-end trim. And if you want the V8 in that fully loaded Grand Cherokee L, it's going to be over $80,000. That is $10,000 more than a base plug-in hybrid version of the Lincoln Aviator. So yes, a BMW X7 is nicer, is better than a Lincoln Aviator. So is a Mercedes-Benz GLS. But this, I think, is worth the price tag, and it's worth looking at if you're shopping for any 3-row luxury vehicle and you want something that is a little bit off the beaten path. I think that's definitely a solid reason to buy the Lincoln. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section. Check out all of our related videos, and if you're interested in one, head down to your Lincoln dealer today. Or if not, you will just prove me wrong again, because again, the Lincoln Aviator has not exactly been selling like hotcakes, even though I do think this is one of the better 3-row luxury SUVs in America. I'll see all of you next week.